welcome, Sharon, and thank you so very, very much for agreeing to this interview. You are such a busy and very gifted author. Uh, would you like to just tell people about the beginning of your journey? Did you always want to be a writer of history?
Hi Wendy, thank you. Yeah, I did. I never thought I'd get the chance. I've loved history ever since I was, as long as I can remember. Um, I suddenly realized a few years ago that it was probably Queen Victoria's bloomers that got me into history.
Oh my goodness, tell me more.
I was in primary school. I was about six, and my favorite teacher, she was brilliant, Mrs. McMinn. Um, we had some clothes from a local museum delivered for all of us to try on, Victorian outfits and things. And my friend Nicola tried on Queen Victoria's bloomers. And I tried on a maid's dress, which was red. It was gorgeous. And but it only dawned on me a couple of years ago when I was doing a podcast interview that they probably weren't Queen Victoria's bloomers. Because yes, they were very wide, they were very big, but Nicola was six and not an adult. And yeah, they did stretch a long way out, but it's like I just thought, yeah, Queen Victoria's bloomers on a 6-year-old in the 1970s. I'm not, you suddenly realize you were duped.
Did they have the split between the legs?
Yeah,
They did.
yeah.
And did the
So
teacher explain why?
yeah,
That was
yeah, and it was brilliant because we were all, we were just little kids, and we loved dress up. But it was just for me, it was like suddenly realization that my whole foundation of history is on a fraud. They were bloomers, but they probably weren't Queen Victoria's.
But it is really, really fascinating how we can be inspired as children, and that will start us on that long, long road of learning and discovery, and then finally it just breaks out into writing books.
Yes. And I've always done research and writing. And so when I actually did start my first book, I didn't actually have to buy a lot of books because I've got them all in my library already. Um, but I actually started because I was on Facebook. I'd always done some writing, but never seriously thought of actually getting published because no one wants to read my stuff. That was my way of, I was gobsmacked when people did start reading it. Um, but I started writing these little biographies of women from history for a Facebook group, Medieval Queens and Heroines. And I really enjoyed doing it. And then my husband got me a blog for Christmas. Christmas
Okay.
2014. He didn't know
Oh,
what to get me, so he got me a blog.
a
Uh,
very, very, very wonderful husband who knows
and
what.
yeah, it was perfect because then I started writing for the blog, and I realized that there wasn't much history out there, accessible history about women. So the blog, it originally, I mean, it's history, the interesting bits. So it was just bits that interested me. Um, but I started focusing on the women because they were the articles that seemed to
Hmm.
be most popular,
Yep.
and that there wasn't anything else out there about. And then Amberley Publishing advertised a competition for you to get your first book published.
Okay.
And you had to, what was it? You had to send in an author bio, um, chapter synopsis, uh, and the first 2,000 words of your introduction. And I did it all and left it on my computer. And I'm like, I'm not sending it in. This is daft. Sharon, nobody's going to publish you. So a week before the closing date, I thought, you know what? If they say no, they say no. Just do it. You
Yep.
never know. And I don't think I even looked at the computer as I pressed send because I'm like, no, no, I'm looking away going, no. Just do it. And I didn't even tell anyone I'd entered this competition because I thought, no, nothing's going to come of it. If I don't tell anyone, then I'm not going to be embarrassed by being rejected because nobody's going to know about it. And the closing date when I closed it, um, and the date for announcing the winners came and went, and nothing happened. So I thought, well, I didn't win then. And then about 2 months later, I think they were going to announce the winner at the end of January. And it was end of March, I got an email from an editor at Pen and Sword saying, "Hi, Sharon, you entered this competition. I'm sorry you didn't win." Fair enough then. However, we would like to publish your book anyway. So
Oh,
I'm like, oh
wow.
my God. And this was at, I can remember the exact time I read the email. It was 3:28 p.m. And my son was in primary school, and we live over the road from school. So I read the email, then had to get my shoes on and get over the road to school to pick my son up at 3:30. So I didn't have time to reply to the email and say yes, 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 because I had to go and get my son. And I'm walking to school with this massive grin on my face, tears rolling down my eyes, thinking
Oh,
somebody wants to publish my book, and I couldn't tell anyone why why I'm in tears and why I'm smiling, because I hadn't replied and I phoned my husband on the way to school. It's a short walk, but I still managed to phone him and said they want to publish, and he's like, "Oh my God!" I'm like, "I know, I know, I know, I can't believe it." And then my mum and dad arrived because they come once a week just to visit. And I goes to my mum, they want to publish my book. And she went, "That's nice, dear." It's like, wow, down to earth with a bang, mum. Thank you. She's like, she didn't realize what it meant. She just thought I was going to do it was just a first idea, but no, it was that they wanted to publish, and that was Heroines of the Medieval World.
yes.
And that was,
What's that? What year was that?
well, it was 2016
Okay, so
that they
that's
said,
now 9 years ago. And
and it was published in 2017.
how many books have
So
you had published since then?
I've just published my eighth, which was
That
Scotland's Medieval
is
Queens.
amazing. That was one of the things
Yeah.
that I wanted to talk to you about is how do you manage to time manage and research? I mean, historical books like what you write, and I've written one, and I know,
Mm.
I mean, I write historical fiction, but I know that the non-fiction one, you've got to do even more research. You've got to go to try and find as much archival stuff as you can.
Yes.
Uh, it is, it is, it is such a detective
Mm.
to do,
It is.
and so you're saying that you've got 8 books published. So that is remarkable. I mean, I am based in Australia, so I do have excuse that it's harder to get across to England.
Yes.
How do you do it? I mean, how do you manage? What's your working day like?
My working day is like I get up, I have an hour's read before I do anything. I told myself, just get a book and have a read. Um, then I have to do any housework that needs doing. So I have to get the washing on. I have to get the washing up done. And because I can't sit and work if I know there's something needs doing.
Okay.
So I have to do all that, and then I can get in my office. And I I know a lot of non-fiction writers, researchers, they go along, they research a chapter, write that chapter, and then research the next chapter, write that chapter. I cannot do that. I have to do all my research first.
Yeah.
Well, not all my research, the bulk of the research. So I spend 9 months of the year doing research
Okay.
and then 3 months writing it up. And even in that 3 months of writing it up, I'm also doing extra research because there's always something you've missed
Yeah.
or something you need to double check on or some new research that's come out in the meantime that has another idea about it. And so for 9 months of the year, I tend to just do the research and then I do write it all up. Because until I've done all the research, I don't actually know how the book is going to be laid out. So, and then I just spend from about 9:30 till 4:30, um, either researching or writing.
Okay.
Actually, I say 9:30 till 4:30. There's a period about 10:30 where I go on Facebook and have a little mooch around and
Mm.
then have a look on Twitter, and anything I can do to prevaricate, I do.
So you got your you keep up with your blog and you do book
Yeah.
reviews. You do your housework, which my admiration of you has just gone way up there because
Yeah, well,
that's one thing
the
I
housework
can
is the
close
last
my
thing. The
I
house
can
does need
close
a
my eyes
Hoover.
to a messy house. I'm looking around at my room at the moment. Yes. Yes. So how do you organize the research? Do you have notebooks? Do you do it on cards? Do you um, have it on computer files, which is always scary because if your computer crashes, then you lose.
All my work, I can show you now. All
Okay.
my work is handwritten.
Oh my
All my
goodness.
research. All my research. I type up my actual work, but all my research is handwritten in basically pucker pads, project pucker pads. So I just get two project books and I just do all my research into those. They've got dividers in for me to keep subjects separate. But yeah, it's all handwritten with a fountain pen even. Um, because I find that if I write it down, I remember it better. So that
Yeah.
when I come to writing it up, I can actually remember whereabouts on the page and on what page the information is I need, usually.
Okay. Well,
Doesn't it's not a perfect system,
no,
but I
I
do
like
manage to
it.
find everything I need usually.
What about when you go and to the archives and you have to read writing from centuries ago? Are you good at doing that, transcribing, making sense?
I'm useless at doing that. I really am useless at doing that. So I do tend to have copies that have been already transcribed by people. Um, I can do it in French and English, which is good because I've there's this wonderful site, archive.org, which I'm sure you know about,
Mm,
has so many of the chronicles on it. Um, most of them have now been translated into English, which is phenomenal.
mm,
Um, I did when I first started out. I couldn't find an Orderic Vitalis in English, but I did find it in French. So it'd been translated from Latin to French. So it's like, oh, that's okay. I could do the French then. Now I can find them in English. But at the start, it was okay, just do it in French. But yeah, I just think sites like archive.org, British History Online, academia and JSTOR, they're a wealth of information on there. You don't actually have to travel too far
that's
unless
true.
it's something specific,
Yeah.
charters and things you want to see. So I do have a couple of days where I go and find them in the archives and just sit there and usually take photos
Yes.
rather than try and copy them then and do all the work on them once I get home.
Yeah, I did the same when I went over to England last year. And like you say, though, there is so much online. It's such a
Mm,
gold mine, thank God. Because when I wrote my first nonfiction book, that was during COVID, so there was no choice but for me to
yes.
do it in Australia. And
Mm,
it was frustrating because I was writing about things that I would have liked to be in the libraries and
mm,
do the archival work. But yeah, we are fortunate
yeah.
with what we have online. Um, do you have a favorite historical period, Sharon? Because you seem to be definitely the British history. I know that you're drawn to that, but you go from the 10th century onto well, you've also got the Tudor
Yeah.
Herald books as well. So
Yeah, I do make it difficult for myself, don't I? Because I've accidentally, I didn't do it deliberately, decided to focus on women. It was just that was just being on Facebook and seeing all these groups about the various kings of England and that. And it was like, there's nobody doing the women. And I've never been interested in women's history. When
Okay.
I was a child, when I was a teenager, it was the Napoleonic Wars and Richard Sharp and, um, never focusing on the women individually. But as I got older and more aware of the way history is so male orientated, I started looking at the women. And of course, I lived near Lincoln in England, and Lincoln has this incredible woman who very few people outside of Lincoln have heard of, called Nicola de la Haye.
Mm.
And she defended Lincoln Castle against everybody.
Yep.
And she is absolutely incredible. She was a friend of King John and a friend of William Marshall. And I suddenly realized that these women who everybody thinks just sat in the background sewing and raising kids had incredible stories to tell themselves. And of course, Nicola de la Haye was my fifth book. It's my only biography that I've written of one person, and it was incredible to be able to tell her story. But and the time she was around, which is 13th century, 12th, 13th century, those are my particular. That's where I like to go and
Yep.
just sit. If
Yep.
the world's getting too much for me, then I just go back to the 13th century and stay there.
I'm quite
So,
amazed because I've learnt from reading your blog, and I don't know if I got that book on. I know I've got the one about the women of the Magna Carta.
mm,
Is she in that one? Because
she is in that one. She gets her own chapter in that.
yeah, yeah,
And
because
she was in, she started out in, I went to Lincoln Castle in 2015 when they had a big exhibition on, because it was the 800th anniversary of Magna Carta. And I learned a lot about Nicola then, and I wrote a blog post. And then she ended up being in the Warrior Heroines chapter of Heroines of the Medieval World. And then from that, there was Ladies of Magna Carta. And I was like, Nicola's getting her own chapter. And as I was writing Nicola's chapter in Ladies of Magna Carta, I went to my editor, I think I might have enough for a book here. Would you be interested? And she was like, oh, yes. So that's the progress. That's how Nicola came about into be her own book, King John's Right Hand Lady. Um, and it's just, and I'm still researching her now. I'm still, if something comes up, I
yeah,
jot it down. You never know. I might be able to get a second edition
I'm
and
really
change it.
amazed that she hasn't been grabbed for a television series. Like you say, she's a
Yeah.
remarkable story from history, and
Mm,
she definitely stood shoulder to shoulder to some major males in her time.
yeah, she did, and she stood up for herself, and she was incredible. But she was
Mm,
a woman.
yeah, yeah. Women's stories have been really disregarded, and it's as did you with the Tudor heroines? Did you discover any Tudor women that haven't been actually put onto the platform? Have been forgotten by
Yeah,
history?
there were a few. There's the Countess of Oxford, who was really interesting because she married the Earl of Oxford, John de Vere, and he was a right wastrel, and she got the backing of the Privy Council to help protect his money because he was the one spending all the money, and she was just his wife, but he was basically put under a wardship to
Mm,
protect his money thanks to her. And she doesn't get any mention. And there was a brilliant diary. It is published, and I can't remember the name of the lady, but she was from Yorkshire, and she wrote her own memoirs basically, because that was the thing about the Tudor times. We didn't have diaries and memoirs of women from before then. But in Tudor times, women started writing their own memoirs, and they came really to the fore in the Stuart times during the
oh,
civil
yes.
wars.
There was, and there was as we get to the end of the reign of Elizabeth the First,
Yeah,
then we have like Mary Sidney. She was thought to maybe have even written some of the poetry that her brother
yeah,
was famous for, and also there's a very important a woman playwright at the end of what was her name? Yeah, 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 but
uh,
they were appearing at the end
yeah.
of Elizabeth's reign.
But that was the difference with heroines of the medieval world. I had to really look for the literary heroines, for the people, women who were writing. Whereas in Tudor, you've just got this flowering of women's literature.
Yeah.
Women, even though a lot of them hid their identity, um, some others actually acknowledged that they were writers and they were allowed to. And you just see this, flowering of women's literature, which gives the lie to women weren't educated, because of course
Mm.
they had to be if they could publish books and things.
I
Um,
would say that Catherine of Aragon was the start of it all because, of course, she had only one surviving child who happened to be a daughter. So, and plus, Catherine herself was a very educated woman,
mm,
very respected in intellectual circles. So, she, yeah, started having young women
yeah.
educated alongside her daughter. And
And but they were doing it in France as well.
yeah,
And de Beaujeu and the
yes.
who Louis the XI's daughter actually wrote a book about how what her daughter needed to learn.
Mm,
And then you had Margaret of Angoulême,
yes,
and it's just there's just all these incredible women, and I think that was the surprise for me with Heroines of the Tudor World, that there were so many women writing and getting a voice
yes,
where they'd been placid in medieval times. They
yes,
were actually giving their own opinions, and a lot of the diaries are very formulaic in that they write about their religious, going to church, saying their prayers, getting up in the morning, saying prayers, counting the sheep, saying prayers,
counting
having
the,
lunch.
counting the sheep. I love that.
Yeah, she counted her sheep. And, you know, but it's just a lovely insight into what was important to them, to the women of the time, including the sheep.
Oh, so we've got your lady from Nicola, who obviously is someone that you look up to a lot. Is there
Mm.
any other women that you think really should be have more books written about them because their lives haven't been explored enough? And
Mm.
yeah, you probably got a list of books that you want to write.
I have. Unfortunately, there's another writer, Catherine Hanley, who seems to be able to read my mind and writes the books I want to write as well. I'm just reading her book on one of my favorite medieval women, Joanna of England, the sister of Richard the Lionheart, and she's called it Lioness Heart, and it's brilliant. And she'd written before that was the daughters of Eleanor of Aquitaine, the family of Eleanor of Aquitaine, and it's like I wanted to write that. So, but luckily there are plenty of women out there for us to write about, because it is such an untapped, underused resource of
Oh,
writing about women's history. There has been a flowering in recent years of different authors actually tackling the subject, and there's such a wide range of um, perspectives on women's history now that it's just brilliant. It's just so much there. And it's like all history, we're making it all the time. So there's always going to be something to write about. And it
oh.
doesn't matter if somebody else does it first, so long as it's out there. So my current project is a rewriting of books that were done in the 19th century. By Mary Ann Everett Green, which is The Lives of the Princesses of England. So I'm doing the medieval, it was originally called The Medieval Princess. And I did say to my editor when I proposed it, I said, you know, it might be a good idea to do this in two books because it's such a big project. And she says, no, we just want one. So I went ahead and just wrote the one and sent it into my editor and said, there's one little snag. It's 143,000 words, and they wanted 95,000. So it's like 50,000 words over the limit. And she says, we can't do it in one book. So, because this was a new editor, and she just went, so split it in two, Sharon. And I'm like, oh, okay. Because I thought she'd go, you know, try and whittle it down. And I'm like, if I whittle it down, then I don't, somebody, you don't give enough perspective to each,
Yeah, of
you know,
course.
you're going to be cutting out their stories. Um,
where's the point that this is going to be book one and this is going to be the start of book two? How do you make that decision?
well, that's what I've had to decide this month. The first book one is due in now at the end of next week. So I've just got, I'm putting an extra chapter in that one, and that'll be done by the end of this week and go off. But basically, it's now the Princesses of the Conquest, so which goes to the daughters of King John, and then the Plantagenet princesses goes from King John to the Wars of the Roses.
Yeah.
So it actually, when I looked at it, if I've ended it at King John, then it literally splits the book in half at the right, even not just in half with the number of princesses, but with the number of words. It was like, oh, if I split it there, then there's equal number of words in each one. Um, and there's a couple of bits I want to add into the Plantagenet princesses because I was aware of how over the word count I was. And I Edward the Fourth's daughters really did get shortchanged. So luckily I can now put a little bit more into their story. Um, so yeah, and I can add I was originally starting with William the Conqueror's daughters, but now I've got that little bit of leeway. I can add Harold the Second's two daughters in there as well, who were also princesses in
You weren't
1066.
attracted to Matilda, William the Conqueror's wife, who had how many kids?
Yeah, well, all her daughters are in there, and Matilda's story gets told in that chapter. Because what I've done is I haven't just gone straight in with, well, princess number one is this. Princess, it's like telling the story of their family as well as, you know, while their children were, and then sending them off to wherever they go and telling their stories individually after once they leave the family.
Mm.
So it has been difficult in working out how to exactly tell each story and keep it family focused because a lot of the time a princess would go off and that would be it. She wouldn't see her family again, although not as often as you think, which has been enlightening for me because I always thought, you know, you marry a princess, that's it. She goes off to the new family and that's it. She never sees her family again. It happened for some of them, but for quite a lot of them, they did still have contact with their parents or their brothers or sisters, and they still saw family. I mean, Joanna, Richard the Lionheart's sister, is a prime example. You know, she was sent off to Sicily at the age of 10 to marry the King of Sicily, expecting never to
Was
see
that
her.
Roger? Was that a Roger?
Sorry?
Was that Roger?
No,
Just
William.
William. Okay.
It was a William. And she, you know, she would never have expected to see her family again. But then just William dies, and in the same year, Richard turns up on his way to crusade. Um, then her mum turns up bringing Richard's bride, Berengaria of Navarre. So she has a quick reunion with her mum, then goes off on crusade with her brother, and eventually returns to Europe and marries Raymond of Toulouse. But she sees her mum again. She sees her brother John again, and it's like the only ones she doesn't see again are her sisters, Matilda and Eleanor. But they both see their mum again,
Oh,
even after they've been sent off to marry. So
Eleanor
it's,
was amazing, wasn't she? She was
yeah,
traveling in her 70s and up there.
yeah, over the Pyrenees in winter in her 70s. It's like, woman, she's incredible.
Amazing. Oh gosh, yes. That's for sure. No wonder her daughters are remarkable too. They had a
Yeah.
remarkable mother and everything. Do
Mm.
you think, as a woman historian, you deal with history differently to male counterparts? Because you're talking about family and family relationships, and what do you think as a
Um, I think probably because I think it's not just as a female historian though. I think women historians now, I think we were taught history a certain way when we were at school. And I was recently asked to suggest ways for bringing women into history in school. And I think I ask a question that a lot of people ignore when they're writing history. They just write what they see on the page and in the chronicles. They don't write about what's not there. And
Mm,
my question now, that's forefront in my mind, whatever I'm reading, is where were the women?
mm,
You know, they're not mentioned, but
yeah.
where were they? Because they were there.
Mm,
They were just at the side of the page
mm,
most of the time, or they get a very short mention, and you're like thinking, right, well, they did more than that because
of course I
it
did.
just, it's not that they weren't there. So, my question always now when I start writing is where were the women and looking for the women? And I think that's probably what I do different um, to a lot of historians because they are not, unless they're concentrating on women's history like you and I do, they're not looking. They
Mm,
just see what's on the page and they write it from that viewpoint because that's the information we've got. But they're not looking for the little pieces
mm,
that bring in, the show where the women were at the time.
yeah, and that's often, well, look, I don't think we can ever make generalizations about how people write, but I have noticed that a lot of male historians do like to write about the battles and the warfare and everything like that, and um,
Yeah,
uh,
but I do as well. I put the warfare and the battles in there when they're there. Like I've just written last year, Women of the Anarchy came out, and the battles. Look, there aren't actually that many battles in the Anarchy that when you think it's 19 years of warfare.
mm,
Pitched battles were very rare. There were only about four in total, I think it was, and I've got three of them in the book.
mm, mm.
But even then, I'm writing about the consequences of the battles, and
Oh yeah.
one of them, the Battle of the Standard, it was Stephen's queen who negotiated the peace rather than Stephen himself. So it's you still bringing the women into it, like
Yeah,
and the
I actually like
1141.
Stephen's wife. I only know her really through reading Sharon Penman's
Yeah,
lovely novel, When Jesus Wept.
when Christ and his saints slept.
Yeah. So I really would love to, see that made into a bio because I thought her story in that was very, very interesting and yeah. Oh, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, I actually think I'm I'm not a fan of Sharon Penman's Stephen. I think he was a bit of a wuss. I'm not a fan of Stephen. Um, I think Matilda of Boulogne was his backbone.
Mm,
I honestly do. I think she was the driving force in a lot of um, the things Stephen did. And I think it's interesting actually that she died in 1152 and in 1154 Stephen caved, even though he had a son. He made this agreement where Empress Matilda's son would succeed him.
yeah.
And I don't think that would have happened if Matilda of Boulogne had still been around.
So, with regards to Matilda, who had the perfect right to be Queen of England, but was never crowned,
Mm.
um, and left a very bad taste in a lot of people's mouths in that period of time. What do you think really went wrong with her attempt to seize her father's crown?
I feel really sorry for Empress Matilda.
Mm.
She's had a really bad press for
Yes.
900 years now, and she doesn't deserve it. She was a strong, brave woman who fought for her own rights. But that was the problem. That's what people didn't like at the time. She was fighting for her own rights
Mm.
rather than the rights of her son, because that would have been more appropriate for a woman to do. Um, but I also think the reason she was vilified at the time by her male counterparts is because they knew they'd done her wrong. You know, they had all, including Stephen, sworn twice on oath to allow Matilda to succeed. And then Stephen broke his oath. And all the barons, except one, who I've got great respect for, Baldwin de Redvers, never submitted to King Stephen.
Mm.
Everyone else did, including Matilda's brother. Because they thought it was the right thing at the time, they didn't want the country to be riven by civil war. They wanted a male leader who could lead armies in battle.
Mm.
And they wanted to keep England and Normandy united. And they didn't like Matilda's husband. And for some reason, anybody who says, "Oh, they didn't want Matilda because it wasn't because she was a woman. It was because they didn't like her husband." You're like, "Yeah, but that's because she was a woman." You
Mm. But I
know,
know that you liked her husband from what
if
I
they
read.
didn't like that, because they thought that her husband, Geoffrey of Anjou,
Mm.
and the Angevins were natural enemies of the Normans, they thought Geoffrey would be king through Empress Matilda.
Yes, that makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah.
Because when in those days, when a woman married, all her belongings, all her rights
Mm.
belonged to her husband. So naturally, Geoffrey would be king. Geoffrey had no interest in England whatsoever. I don't think he ever even came here after um, Empress Matilda, after Stephen was king. He was interested in Normandy, and he got Normandy. Because when Matilda came to England to claim her crown, Geoffrey was invading Normandy to claim Normandy for his son Henry.
Mm. No, it sounds to me like, Sharon, that you might be thinking about doing a book on Matilda. Are you?
Well, I did Women of the Anarchy, which was basically Matilda of Boulogne and Empress Matilda,
Okay.
and the war through their viewpoints rather than Stephen's. Because everyone, when you see anarchy books, it's always Stephen and Matilda.
Yep.
Whereas my idea was to put in both Matildas at the centre. And I did discover that 1141 is known as the War of the Two Matildas because Stephen was in prison. So Matilda of Boulogne was leading Stephen's army, and Empress Matilda was leading her own army. And it's like this is the only war in English history where women are at the forefront of both armies. So it was Empress Matilda is a pet fascination of mine because I do think she was given a very um she was just given a dealt a really hard hand, and everything she did was like, no, you shouldn't be doing that, you shouldn't be doing that. And even now you talk about her and somebody goes, oh yeah, but she was haughty, she was, she brought all these German attitudes over and nobody liked it, and it wasn't that at all.
Mm.
um it was the fact she was trying to act like a king. She was acting the way she'd seen her father act.
Mm.
One of the criticisms of her, I think it's in the Gesta Stephani, the Deeds of Stephen, which is um, a chronicle written um, to make Stephen out into this hero. Uh, it says she failed to stand when King David of Scotland entered the room and her brother Robert, Earl of Gloucester, entered the room. And as a woman, she should have stood. She, at that time, she'd been declared Lady of the English, so she was the ruler of England.
Mm.
But they expected her to stand for her brother, who was a mere earl.
Mm. Mm. Wrong.
Because she was a woman. She wasn't a woman, she was the ruler. And as far as she was concerned, she stood for nobody. Her
Mm.
father wouldn't have stood for them, so neither would she.
Mm. Mm.
And And that's, they say, oh, that's her German manners. And it's not, it's her father. The prime example for her was Henry the First.
Yeah, 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 that's for sure. Hey, did her son rely on her counsel?
He did.
Yeah, yeah.
He did. Yeah. He always, when he became King of England, she was basically his vice regent in Normandy.
Okay. Because he was
Uh,
only about 20 when he was young, wasn't
yeah,
he?
he was. He was 18 or 19, I think. He was, but he'd been fighting for a long time. He'd been ruling Normandy for a few years by the time he became King of England. So he'd already served his apprenticeship. He'd been fighting in England for the last few years, trying to get the crown from Stephen, or
Mhm.
just niggling at Stephen, I think, as well, and getting people on his side. I think the reason Stephen did back down in 1153 and say, okay, Henry can be king after me, was that he realized that none of the barons were going to support his son when the legitimate line of Henry the First was stood in front of them in the body of Henry the Second.
Yeah.
Stephen was, they all knew Stephen was a usurper. He wasn't the rightful king.
Mm.
But Henry was Henry the first grandson. He was the rightful king, and nobody was going to support Stephen's son against Henry.
Yeah. Yeah. Stephen's son had an unfortunate end, didn't he? Was he one of the um, English royalty that died through eating something, or was that?
No, that was Henry the First himself. He died
Ah,
a surfeit of lampreys. William, Stephen's son Eustace, the eldest son, I think died at a feast choking.
so yes,
Um,
that's
because that was seen as he'd just raided the monastery of Ely or
yes.
something, so it was seen as divine justice.
I knew it was
And
something to do
his
with food.
yeah, and his younger son William, he died later on during Henry the Second's reign. He died. He was on campaign in Toulouse with Henry the Second, and he got sick on his way home from there, probably from some camp fever or
Yeah,
something.
as I often did and everything. All right, so the final question for you is of all your books, because you've got 8 books now, is there one book that you are most proud of and why?
Oh God, I
I know
don't
it's like trying to
know.
trying to decide your
My
favorite
babies.
child.
They're all my babies. Um, I am very proud of my last book, Scotland's Medieval Queens, because that was one that I love the idea of it. There are a couple of books out now also, one by Heather Darcy, The Stuart Spouses, and one by Rosalind Marshall, Scottish Queens. But Rosalind Marshall's covers from medieval through to the early modern, and there was only 100 pages of the medieval queens. So actually, to write one that's just from Saint Margaret to Margaret of Denmark to just concentrate on the Scottish queen, Scottish medieval queens, there wasn't anything out there when I wrote it, and I think I'm hoping I've done a good job of that and telling their stories from their viewpoint and showing how they helped shape Scottish history
Yeah,
because they are very underrepresented in throughout, you know, they're
yeah,
usually ignored or sidelined, might like most women. And Women of the Anarchy has been a surprise to me. It's been very well received. I went to the Medieval Women in Their Own Words exhibition at the British Library, and they had Women of the Anarchy in the gift
oh,
shop
how
as part of the
wonderful.
exhibition.
Congratulations. That's must have,
Thank you.
oh, it's a wonderful feeling, isn't
It
it?
is. It's just like, oh my God. Because everybody, I went at the end of the exhibition in February, and I've been getting messages from people all the time going, oh, I went to the medieval women exhibition, and your book was there, Sharon. So it was like, when I got there, I thought, well, they probably haven't got any now. When I got there, and they got it on the shelf. So I went up to the lady at the counter and said, that's my book. Do you want me to sign them? And oh, yes, please. So I'm there in the British Library signing copies of Women of the Anarchy.
Oh, how wonderful. That is really brilliant. That's really good. Going back to the Queens of Scotland, though, have you got a favourite English, Scottish Queen that you can talk about?
I think, yeah, there's one that a lot of the time gets overlooked, but Margaret of England. She was Henry III's daughter, and she was married to Alexander III of Scotland. And her story is just like she was this young girl about 10 years old when she went to Scotland, and she was homesick. And um, Henry III sent Eleanor of Provence, Margaret's mother, sent her own physician to check on her and make sure she was all right. And then Henry III and Eleanor of Provence would come up to the Scottish border to meet with Margaret and Alexander throughout their lives. It was like it's this thing, princesses just go off and get forgotten and that's
Mm,
it. They
mm.
didn't, Henry III particularly was very close to all his children. And Margaret actually managed to come to England when she was pregnant, and her first child she gave birth to at Windsor with her
Oh,
mum there.
oh, that's wonderful. That's really,
And
oh,
she'd have visits from her brother Edward and her brother Edmund, and it's just this family life, even though she was so far away from her family.
yeah.
And but she was she as Alexander's wife, she was an integral part of the Scottish story, and she had three children, two sons and a daughter. And when they were still, all three of them were still alive when she died, but within just a few years of her death, um, the boys died, and the daughter died in childbirth, giving birth to Margaret, the Maid of Norway, who was the first accepted queen regnant
Mm,
in the British Isles.
mm.
If Empress Matilda didn't get totally accepted, Margaret, the Maid of Norway, was, she was pronounced queen as far as the Scots were concerned. Unfortunately, she never set foot in Scotland because she died on her way here from seasickness, and she was still only 8 years old. But it's this magnificent dynasty that Margaret and Alexander had created, three children, everything to save. Scotland's a time of peace for Scotland. England and Scotland had always been at odds. But during that marriage, it was they were peace, they had 70 odd years of peace thanks
Mm.
to Henry III arranging this marriage. Because then it all goes to pieces. Because when Margaret Maid of Norway dies, Edward the First decides to interfere, and there's wars of independence in
Yeah,
Scotland. And you've got this total contrast of the peace and prosperity of the reign of Alexander III with Margaret as his
yeah,
queen, and then Margaret's brother just pounces when everything goes to pieces. So it's just, I like telling that story to show um, just the way everything can be going all nice and smoothly, and then all of a sudden it just turns to disaster,
yeah.
thanks to Edward the First, who's not my favourite monarch.
Oh, right. Not mine either. Yeah, it just shows
But
you about human greed, isn't it? And
yeah, but
uh,
then out at the end of that, you get Robert the Bruce and his wife Elizabeth de Burgh, who,
mm,
and again, is another one who is just a brilliant story and so much pain drawn into it. She was a captive of Edward the First and then Edward the Second for 8 years, at a time when she knew that she needed to be with her husband to be able to provide the heir that Robert the Bruce sorely needed to help make peace in Scotland.
mm,
And Edward the First knew that while he kept her, Robert the Bruce's throne would never be secure because the succession wasn't secure.
mm,
So it's just this catch-22 situation for Elizabeth.
mm. Well,
And
she did manage to have David. Uh,
yeah, she did. She did
yeah,
manage to. She was released eventually, thanks to
And she
Robert
would have been in her
winning Bennett
30s.
Prize.
She would have been in her 30s then, wouldn't she?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, 'cause that was her only child, if I remember right.
No, she had
Oh,
daughters as well.
she
So,
had
and
daughters as well.
she did have another son who they can't work out whether he was a twin of David or born a year or so after David, but he died as an infant.
Mm.
So,
A
but she'd
lot of
had
twins
something
born
like,
in the Scottish family. There was a lot of,
mm, yeah.
wow.
But it does go in families, doesn't it? There's no, I don't think there's a one instance of it in the English royal family, but in the Scottish,
Hmm.
um, there's a lot of twins.
And if they did,
And it's funny actually, but none of them, can't remember if any, and it's twin boys as well.
yeah,
But I can't remember if
most
both,
of them, I
if
don't
there's
think
anywhere both survived.
only one survived
Yeah.
twins. So that was, yeah, it would have been terrible.
Mm,
Just to imagine, that's one of the things when I'm imagining lives of women in that time and all the children that
yeah.
I don't think I would have gone mad. I would have gone,
Yeah. You think of, I think Eleanor of Castile is one of the prime examples for me. She went through so many, um, she had something like, was it three sons who died, as infants or young children, as many daughters as well. And you can understand why she and Edward were so close to each other, but why she seems to have been distant from her children because she'd had so much tragedy
mm,
in with the children. It must have been awful.
that's for sure. Thank God we live in times that we do.